Hello and welcome to Traditional Painting the Digital Way. This is where I use digital painting apps to teach traditional painting techniques. This is part 7 of my Apples in a Hat series, and in this video we're going to start working on the hat and making it more refined and adding some final details to it. If you want to follow along with traditional materials, check out part 1 in this series where I have a list of all the paint, brushes, and canvas that I use. The app that we're going to be using is Corel Painter 2019 for Windows. And I'm going to go ahead and start refining the brim of the hat here. And I'm just using a yellow ochre type color here to adjust the brim of the hat and just sort of adjust the shape of it, make it a little bit longer and a little bit more oval shaped. And if you're following along traditionally, you can use your number 6 flat brush and just use some yellow ochre. And you can maybe throw in just a touch of burnt sienna. We just want kind of a dark yellow color here. And then I'm working a little bit on trying to add the highlights to the hat. And I would probably use yellow ochre with white acrylic gesso if I were doing this in acrylic. And you just kind of want to get sort of a feathery stroke on the brim of the hat here. And we want this to look like a straw hat. So I'm sort of letting some of the darker color underneath show through the lighter color. And then when I smudge it, I make sure that I don't kill all of my dark color there. And I'm just doing this in the places where the sunlight is going to be hitting the hat through the flowers, so it will make it look like there's rays of sun coming through the flowers, but we're going to put the flowers in at the very last. And so what you would do if you were following along traditionally is a dry brush stroke, which means you would not put very much paint on your brush, and you would let it feather out at the end of the stroke, and you would probably take your finger or a paper towel and just smudge it out. So the way I'm doing this in Corel Painter is that I'm using the diffuse blur brush to smudge it out here, and it gives it kind of a really nice feathery look and makes it look like paint strokes and gives it a real painterly look, which is what I want. And so that's what I'm doing here, just going around, and I'm making sure that the brush strokes follow the shape of the hat. You want the brush strokes to go around the edge of the hat and make them look like they're following the contour of the hat. It's a oval shape, and so you want the brush strokes to be in an oval shape. You don't want to make these vertical or anything, because that just wouldn't look right. So make sure that you follow the shape of your hat. And then here I'm just kind of playing around with some of the blending brushes, just trying to get a little bit more of a what do you call it, a blending look, I guess, and trying to get it so that it quits doing that little white fringe that goes around the brushes. And you have to make sure that you've got certain things checked in the blending there. You have to kind of just play around with the blending, and you might have to actually combine layers and things here to get rid of that white fringe that shows up. Now the newer versions of Painter have got where you can sort of get rid of that, but in the older versions that was kind of a problem. But in the newer ones, you can go ahead and just tweak some of the settings and get it where it will just go ahead and blend like it's supposed to. And so here, that's what I was doing. And then I'm trying to draw a little bit of straw-like look on the brim, because as you can see in the photo reference, it's got a crisscross look there because it's a straw hat that's been woven together. And so I'm just making suggestions of that pattern there, and I'm using my pencil brush there that you can get in the pencil category. And you can also use the real long bristle brush and just make it really small and get that sort of crosshatch pattern in with it. And that's what I'm doing here, is sort of putting in a crosshatch pattern there, because that follows the look of a straw hat. And what I'll do is go ahead and draw that in, and then come back and sort of smudge over it so that it doesn't look like it's out of place there. We'll smudge it over and make it soften, and that'll give it more of a painterly look. And you kind of have to maybe do this more than once, which I did. I had to go over it several times. And anyway, so that's what I'm doing, and I'm hitting it with the blending brush, the diffuse blur, and just kind of going over it and trying to soften those lines a little bit, but trying to not completely erase these lines either. So I'm just trying to go over it and sort of keep that textured look, but not lose all of the crosshatch pattern that I've added on there. And sometimes you have to do this more than once, and of course I had to go back over it a little bit more and do that again. And if you're following along traditionally, you can use your script brush for this and just make a real thin line and then smudge it with your finger or the paper towel, or you can go back over the top of it with some of your yellow ochre color and make a glaze, and that will also diminish the boldness of the lines. It will soften them and make them look more like they're a painterly picture there, and just it won't leave the lines like they're some kind of foreign object or something. You just kind of have to soften them in and make it look like the pattern of the hat, and make sure that you follow the contours of the hat. And I'm just kind of working a little bit on the brim now. I'm using a little bit of a darker color, and if you're following along traditionally, you can use the burnt umber colors and maybe mix yellow ochre with them, and just kind of shape the brim of the hat here. And that's what I'm sort of working on right now, is just trying to get the shape of the hat and the stitches right here that hold the hat band inside the hat. It's got a little bit of a stitch on the edge, and you can use your darker color for that, and just kind of try to get that pattern, just show it a little bit for some of the detail. It doesn't have to be real bold detail, but you want it kind of there and soften it out a little bit. And here I'm using the just add water, or the grainy water, to soften some of the darker strokes into the hat again, and just trying to get that straw hat texture again. That's what I'm working on, just trying to get the look of a straw hat here. And sometimes it takes more than one glaze to get this going. So that's what I'm doing here, is just kind of trying to get that look and work on the edge of the hat, make sure that it's an oval shape, and just try to get it more correct according to the photo reference a little bit. And I'm just working a little bit more on the highlights again. Sometimes you have to go back in certain spots and smudge in some more highlight to make it look a little bit better and to correct the shape of the hat. And so that's what I'm trying to do here. And then you go back with your dark colors and just repeat trying to get the pattern on the hat again. And that's what I'm doing, is just trying to get the pattern. And if you notice, I'm using the eyedropper to get the exact colors again so that it doesn't look out of place. Now you can use different colors in the hat too, and it's natural to use different colors in the hat because the light is hitting it in different places, but you still kind of want them to be sort of the same colors that you used before. And of course, if you're doing this traditionally, you would just mix up a pile of paint enough that you can work on the hat. And if you can't mix it up exactly like, that's okay. Like I said, it doesn't matter if the colors vary a little bit, because there's variations in the way the hat is made and the way the straw is, the way the light hits it. So variations are good, but you kind of just want them to be sort of in the same color family. And so that's what I'm doing, is just working on the edge of the brim, shaping it and shaping the inner hat band here a little bit more with the dark color. But I also added a little bit of highlight there because the light is bouncing off the apples and shining a little bit on the edge of the inner hat band. So you can add a little bit of light brown to that. And I'm working a little bit more on the stitch pattern again, just trying to show that the hat band is sewn in. And just kind of smudging it out, though, not making it real bold. We just kind of want a little bit of a suggestion there for the stitching in the hat. And then I just wanted to work a little bit more on the inside of the hat. I thought that it needed a little bit more of the grass showing through. If you look at the photo reference, it's got a little bit more light green showing through the straw pattern of the hat. So I worked on that a little. And then, of course, that messes up the edge of the apples, so you kind of have to go back and work on the highlight of the apples a little bit more and just work on the shape of them. And you want to put the final, close to the final touches on the apple anyway. Right now, the apple's in the hat. So I'm just kind of refining the shapes a little bit more, looking at the photo reference and seeing some of the bumps and the curves that are on the apple. Since they're not a totally round object, you want to show those bumps and those curves, and so I'm adding a little bit of a darker red. Again, you can use alizarin crimson for this, and maybe Grumbacher red if you're following along with your acrylics. And you just want to go ahead and add this on the edges of the apples, and I've mostly got the shape that I want of the apples, but there's a little bit that can be worked on the edges. And you can add a little bit more of some lighter colors and a little bit more red, just to make this apple that I'm working on right here stand out a little bit more from the ones that are behind it. So you kind of work on the three-dimensional look now of the apples. And this is the part where you get into the details, and sometimes it can be real tedious, but it's also exciting because things are starting to come alive and to look three-dimensional now. And so you don't want to skip this part, because you want to go ahead and bring out the final look and the final three-dimensional aspect of your painting. And this really gives it the three-dimensional look, I guess. The final looks, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. This really brings out the final details and makes your painting pop. So you want to add these final highlights and these final shadows, and that's what I'm doing on this. I'm adding more of the final highlight here, and you can use very close to white. You can use an off-white, but you can use sort of white acrylic gesso mixed with cadmium orange, and that will give you close to a final highlight if you're following along with your acrylics. So this is the end of part 7 of my Apples in a Hat series, and in part 8 we're going to work more on the hat and just try to finish out the final details on the apples in the grass. So if you're interested in that, hit the subscribe button. And thanks everybody for watching. Thank you so much for your support. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments down below, and I will catch you later.